we're in bloom conditions here in Lake Erie. And so what a bloom means is you're growing in excess. The vast majority are green algae or diatoms or brown algae, and those algae are actually natural to the lake and don't have the ability or capacity to produce any toxins. It's only a small set of algae that actually show up in the lake in the cyanobacteria group, which although called algae are actually bacteria.
We were started quite a number of years ago monitoring tributaries and creeks and that go into Lake Erie, and essentially our mission is then to take that information to better understand what's happening in these watersheds so we can manage them properly.
Since the Toledo crisis back in 2014, the Ohio Department of Higher Education invested $2 million a year to support research to inform management decisions for the state of Ohio. It's driven primarily by EPA, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Ag, and Department of Health.
This is a rain gauge. Rain dictates a lot of what happens on these fields, so it determines how much runoff, how much water runs off these fields. So it's really important to be able to determine how much it's raining every day and every week, because that will dictate not only how many samples we get, but sometimes the nutrient levels, the nutrient runoff, and the sediment runoff from the fields.
The HTLP is our Heidelberg Tributary Loading Program, and this is our long-term monitoring program. It's what we're best known for.
You know, it took us 4 decades to get into this situation we're now. Past farming practices, again, not malicious, but building up the soil phosphorus. Some of the new techniques we use now, you know, this was a long time coming. And even though we're doing great research now and that we're incentivizing some of the things that we're doing on the field through the governor's H2 Ohio project, we can't expect that this is going to be a flip of the switch and overnight go back.
So we are currently up to 23 different sampling locations. You know, most of them are focused in Lake Erie, but we do also monitor 3 of the main tributaries that go into the Ohio River, as well as some tributaries around Grand Lake St. Mary's, which is Ohio's largest inland reservoir. Now, put it all together, it's about 54% of the land area of Ohio.
We knew that agricultural fields around Lake Erie are the largest source of nutrients that lead to harmful algal blooms. And we also knew that there were a number of fields, maybe roughly 5% of fields, that have what we call elevated phosphorus soil levels, or sometimes known as legacy phosphorus fields.
For every water sample we collect, we monitor lots of different things on each water sample. The very simplest thing is just how muddy is the water. You know, we want to know the amount of suspended sediment that's in that water. And to do that, we just measure what accumulates on a filter. Well, in that sediment, in that mud, or those particulates, phosphorus can be attached to that.
How does the bloom behave? So why does it show up when it shows up? What's driving bloom behavior? What's driving it to become toxic or not toxic? When is the toxins high in the water column versus at the bottom where our water intakes are? What are the genetic strains that exist out there? So a lot of research has happened in that area.
Nutrient soil levels are proprietary, not that people are keeping them so much, just a limited number of people know about them, the farmers and the agriculture retailers they work with. We asked the Ohio Agribusiness Association to reach out to some of the nutrient service providers to see if they'd be interested in working with us on a project like this to identify legacy phosphorus fields and to identify farmers and nutrient service providers that would want to work with us on this project.
I was contacted from Ohio State through, actually, they found one of our fields that we've just recently took over, and we had some very high phosphorus levels out there from a previous tenant. And yeah, let's figure this out. You know, we're really not productive in that area of the field, even though we have great fertilizer scores. So let's take a look at it. He came in, put a plan in together to try to capture some water and try to really figure out what's going on. It's worked really well, and you know, we're hoping to have some solutions out of this and really learn from it. When we consider ourselves stewards of the land, you know, you got to realize that our generation, we're just really borrowing the land from the previous generation, and we're going to pass it on to the next generation. Our theory is that we want to be able to take that land, improve on it from when we got it, and be able to pass it on in better condition to the next generation.
That's a flume right there. And it allows us to measure if there is surface runoff, the water level in that notch at the end of that flume. We have a sensor in there to measure how high that water level is. And then by the height of that water, we can determine what the flow or the amount of water coming out of that flume is. And then when we collect our water sample, it'll tell us how much, what the phosphorus concentration is in that water. And then by multiplying the flow and the concentration together, we can figure out the mass of phosphorus that's moving off this field over time.
A best management practice, BMP, is something you deploy in your landscape to hold the nutrients back. Well, some fields have different soil types, different slopes, different moisture regimes. Historically, they may have planted different crops or used different pesticides or herbicides, and so every situation is uniquely different. And so we're putting a lot of time and financial investment from the state of Ohio to address those issues.
The nutrient service providers, they work with about 50% of the farms to test their soil levels and advise farmers on fertilizer levels, on other and so working through the Ohio Agribusiness Association with the Nature Conservancy, OABA put us in touch with over 100 milligrams per kilogram. They kept all the farmer information confidential, but we could look at those fields and see, okay, is this field hydrologically isolated? Is it a field where we could monitor it? Or they came out to that first meeting because the nutrient service providers are very trusted. They might have been working with that farmer for decades. And so if they advocated for the project, do these legacy phosphorus fields have higher discharge of nutrient runoff like we think they do? The other key question is, how effective will management be on these sites? What kind of devices can we put next to these fields to reduce the amount of nutrients coming off their fields, but allow farmers to use those nutrients for productive agriculture?
What we're really lucky about now that we didn't have probably in the 80s, is that we have these huge edge of field networks between the USDA, Kevin King's work, and Jay Martin's stuff that USGS has been doing. We can look at what they're finding at the edge of field and be like, well, we're seeing these patterns in the watershed, and we see them at maybe every point in our watershed, from small streams to large streams. Well, what are you seeing at the edge of field, and what does that mean about what the farmers are doing and what they should be doing? These things all sort of match up really well to help us have a clear understanding. It's kind of like solving a mystery of like how to best put together the good management plans that we need to improve the lake.
For a long time, we've known that phosphorus, the amount of phosphorus that comes off of fields and gets into Lake Erie, really drives the severity and the size of the algal bloom in Lake Erie. What we're coming to learn over time is that nitrogen also plays a role, and perhaps that the amount of nitrogen in the water might dictate how toxic the algal bloom is. So there's a lot that we have yet to learn, but we think that phosphorus dictates the severity, maybe the overall size of the bloom, but the amount of nitrogen might control how toxic that bloom is.
So when people ask me, how long is this going to take, I said it could be very quick, but it could also be very long. And what I mean by that is if we hit that 40% reduction, those target loads of the nutrients into the lake in a given year, there is no bloom that year. So if you can hit 40% reduction, bloom goes away overnight.
The real Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement doesn't care so much about the tributaries themselves. What they're trying to do is reduce the frequency of blooms in Lake Erie. That's where our data will also play a key role of being able to assess, is it still tributary loading that's driving what's happening in the lake? Is it something else? Are we reaching these goals? Are these goals even appropriate anymore? And that's part of that process called adaptive management.
Our soil is just as important as the air we breathe and as the water we drink. So it's a living organism to us, and we're going to keep it healthy, and we're not going to overfeed it and we're not going to underfeed it, but we're going to maintain the levels that we need to maintain to be profitable. Ultimately, we hope more operations adapt to kind of what we're doing. I think that's just going to be the wave of the future.